Hello. How's it going, everybody? We are back to review Dune episode 2, Dune Prophecy episode 2. And yeah, I'm back with AltshiftX and Nerdcookies. A good amount of stuff happened in this episode. It was pretty interesting. We got some nods at Dune lore. We got some there were some interesting things that happened. So, what's up, guys? How you feeling about the episode?
Hey Quinn, how's it going?
Pretty good. Pretty good.
Hello. Good to be here.
Mhm.
Lots of
So,
fun stuff to talk about.
Compared to the first episode, what do you feel about this one? Did you like it more or less than the first episode? For me, it's kind of like I think if anyone's getting into the show, you should probably watch the first two at the same time because they kind of go into it. They I feel like the arc of the first one doesn't really complete itself, and it doesn't get going until this one. Am I really low? Is my volume quiet? God dang it! People are saying the volume is
We were
quiet.
we were trying to get this worked out. Am I
We were
quiet
literally trying
too?
to get it worked out.
It sounds fine on my end.
Is
Yeah, y'all
everybody's
sound fine
volume
to
low?
me.
If someone's
Okay.
quiet, tell us in the live chat, but otherwise I reckon we'll just power on.
Yeah.
Yeah, we're
Who's
gonna.
quiet?
Are
Tell me who's quiet. Everyone's saying I'm quiet. As soon as I
testing.
started talking, they're like,
I
use the
said everyone's
voice.
Apparently
quiet.
Everyone's too
everyone's
quiet.
quiet.
All of you sound fine.
Oh boy.
Quinn could turn up a little bit. Okay, I trust James.
Uh, we were trying
Everyone's
to get
saying
this worked out.
everyone's saying contradictory things, but in equal proportions. So if we average it out, I think we're all fine.
Yeah, I think we're fine. I think it's good enough. I think we're good
Okay.
enough. Okay.
Ooh,
So
nice.
all right. So yeah, this episode was interesting. I think if anyone's thinking about watching the show, you should probably watch the first two at the same time, is what I was saying. Anyway, so we open up this episode with a ship flying down to Wallach 9, and out of that ship comes a Sook doctor. So this was really interesting. We were talking a little bit about this before we started streaming. Like, why do you think they chose to show a Sook doctor? Do you think there is something deeper, or do you think they're just like, oh, here's a Dune thing that exists in the Dune universe. Let us show you a Dune Sook Doctor because it's something that exists? Or do you think that character is going to have a deeper role later in the next four episodes?
Yeah, they definitely took the time to establish her and that she has a relationship with Tula and she has a relationship with the Sisterhood. So you'd think they should use her. Something I thought they might do is like, what if this Sook Doctor becomes the Emperor's personal Sook Doctor later on, which is something that happens in um, Brian's books and Frank's books, having that trusted Doctor relationship as a way to manipulate the Emperor. Maybe um, that might be a way to use the character.
Mm-hmm. Well,
Yeah, that was interesting, and an interesting surprise that she had was Bene Gesserit trained. So I think there's precedent for that as well. Bene Gesserit Suk doctors, but that was cool to
Yeah,
see.
yeah.
And so
I mean,
yeah.
a Bene Gesserit controls all their muscles and their body on the molecular level, so you'd think that would make you a pretty good doctor if you have that level of understanding of biology.
hmm
Mm-hmm. And what I think is was interesting about this episode and interesting in showing the Sook Doctor and also Michaela later on is that the Bene Gesserit do like infiltrate like different governments and systems and worlds, and they're like all over the place. Like, so I think it's cool that it's showing the influence of the Bene Gesserit.
Yeah,
It was
because
interesting
like,
too what she said. Sorry, go ahead.
go on.
Just the manner of Kasha's death that they confirmed. So it's an internal heat, or that was the source of it, with the Meridian network, I
It
think
Yeah,
was
is
it
the
was
an acute
basically
terminology.
imbalance in her meridian network. I
so
would
we were
say
just
extremely acute.
we were just talking about this. It's basically technobabble. Like, what does that mean exactly? It's like that doesn't explain anything.
I find it so funny how she just says it with a straight face as though this is a common diagnosis. I've seen
Mm-hmm.
many such cases. Yeah, when it's like, no, this person caught fire from inside. What are you talking about? It's nuts.
It's like, what caused it?
Yeah, like it's completely normal. This sorts of stuff. Yeah, it's very pseudoscience-y, which I did appreciate. I think that there's some sort of scientific, again, pseudoscience explanation for these strange uh, powers, or some. Well, I don't know what the source of the power is, but I don't know. I thought that was kind of neat, that was something based in medical pseudoscience that
What, like,
kind of
Yeah.
makes
yeah.
sense for this universe.
I think that's a really interesting question, like science versus pseudoscience, because they just had the Butlerian Jihad. And, I haven't read all of Brian's books, but I know that part of that jihad was about opposing not just AI, but like a suspicion of technology and a suspicion of science in general. And in the Sisterhood of Dune book, that's an issue for the Sook doctors. They are under suspicion by the Butlerians who don't like advanced medical science. So I wonder, like, what even is the state of medical science at this point when they just came out of this violent revolution that was partly an anti-science revolution. I doubt if they're really. I doubt that they're really getting into that here, but it does make me wonder about the state of the world building there.
Yeah, they don't have the time, but it is a good point. I feel like enough people are saying that the mic volume is low.
Okay.
That
Should
it
we all
probably
turn our volume
Okay, I'm
up?
gonna turn it up just a little
let's
bit.
all turn it up a little bit.
What could go wrong? I've turned mine up slightly.
I've
Testing.
turned
How's
mine
it
up
sound?
slightly.
Yeah, you're sounding louder, Elaine.
You're sounding
Okay.
loud. Am I sounding louder?
You
Mm-hmm.
are sounding louder. All
Yeah.
right.
Hopefully we
Uh,
sound similar.
All right. Let us know in the chat if anyone's too loud. Something I found interesting about the
Okay,
Sook Doctor.
nerd cookies is too loud. Okay, turn yours down a little bit. They're saying you were more fine. I'm
Okay,
good
yes.
now. Elaine is too loud, and I think we'll be good after that.
Something I found interesting about the Sook Doctor is that she has the diamond tattoo, which suggests imperial conditioning, because the
Mm-hmm.
Sook Doctors are like conditioned, they're like hypnotized to never be able to kill the people who they are looking after. So that's meant to be the mark of absolute loyalty, right? But
Yes.
here the Sook Doctor is saying, no, no, sisterhood first. So she has
Yes.
divided loyalties. She is wearing the mark of absolute loyalty to her patients, but she's simultaneously saying that she's loyal to the sisterhood, which should be
Yeah.
kind of impossible, right? I mean, it's kind of like
Well,
Yue.
I wonder if her Bene Gesserit conditioning somehow like overrides or supersedes like the Sook conditioning. Like because of her Bene Gesserit training, that like the Sook conditioning doesn't even really work.
Yeah.
Like she has all of the training, but she's not conditioned like a normal Sook doctor would be potentially.
I did wonder about that. I think maybe if they were to ask uh, her to do something that would be overtly a betrayal of whatever client she was conditioned to serve, or but no, she's just conducting an autopsy here, so I don't know. I did think about that too. That's kind of interesting that she's made a point to say sisterhood first. It does seem a little contradictory, but maybe if it
Hmm.
has to reach the level of outright betrayal of their is what they're asking for her to do. I don't know. Yeah.
Yeah, well, maybe that's why they introduced the character. Maybe they're going to present this character a um, with a dilemma where she wants to do the right thing for the sisterhood, but it goes against her conditioning as a doctor. Maybe she has to betray the sisterhood at some point. I mean, look, maybe this is literally the only scene where we will see this character. This character
Yeah.
might not matter, but they've only got 6 episodes, and they spent a whole scene with her. So then she's got a name, Nazir. So it would be interesting to use her for something.
I mean, that would be cool since we didn't get anything having to do with Dr. Yue in the
I was just about
recent
to say
film
that.
adaptation. Yeah. With the traitor subplot being non existent virtually, it was never
Yeah.
like stated that no, it couldn't possibly be Dr. Yue. There's just absolutely no way he would betray them. Um,
Yeah. This
so
could be
that would
some
be
of
cool if they did something more with that.
yeah, because this could be some of the only like real like Sook energy that we get because like you said, like we don't really get an explanation of like Dr. Sui and like his like motivation and like why it's so like insane that he betrays them because of the conditioning. So yeah, maybe they're going to use this show as an opportunity to explore that, because that was a part of the Dune book that's like, from the beginning, and it's a part of what like builds the tension, that there's this secret. And there's that scene in the Dune book where Jessica is kind of on to Dr. Yui, and she knows he's hiding something, but she doesn't think that he has this secret because of his Suk conditioning. It can't possibly be Dr. Yui. So yeah, I would love to see more. They could definitely play with something like that potentially. I think the other like most interesting part of this episode was the Lila
Oh
awakening,
Yeah.
yeah.
the
Mm,
Yeah.
spice agony,
best
and I
part.
yeah, and I wonder too what this is gonna mean for the relationship between Valya and Tula now, because I said in my review that although the Bene Gesserit have emotional control, they're really good at controlling their emotions. We see time and time again throughout the Frank Herbert books that they are kind of ruled by their emotions often. They are often acting emotionally. The whole plot of Dune is kicked off by the fact that Jessica acts emotionally and betrays her Bene Gesserit ideals and conditioning. And then, like later, Odrade, a large part of that story in Heretics of Dune is about Odrade's past and how that's tied to her emotions and like her ideas about love and all that stuff.
Yeah.
So I wonder if the relationship between Valya and Tula is going to fracture over Valya forcing Lila into the agony before she was ready and putting her in a coma, apparently. Apparently, she's not dead. What do you guys think?
Yeah, I don't know. In the trailer footage, didn't we see like uh,
I don't
uh
know.
a funeral procession on Wallach 9? So I thought maybe, until I
Maybe
saw
it's
the trailer for the preview of next episode, where she's like in the medical, some sort of coma. She's got something over her face, I guess, to aid her breathing. So I guess she's brain dead, possibly.
potentially. I think that if she's not dead yet, she's possessed by Dorothea, right? And that Dorothea is gonna
Whoa.
wake up at some point and like do something to, because she said like, "I'm going to destroy your hope for the future" or
Ooh.
something like that. So, um, if she wasn't dead, I was thinking, oh, she's definitely possessed. This is
Oh,
you know
that's
this is a Baron
interesting.
Harkonnen situation.
Could
So
this be the impetus for why the Bene Gesserit are so like
abomination,
against abominations? Like anyone who's suspected of abomination is executed. Could this be the impetus
absolutely.
for that? That'd be cool.
Yeah,
Because
that'd
I'm
be
thinking
really
like,
cool.
if she's not dead right now, what's the point of keeping the character alive for another episode if she's not going to wake up again? We're just going to have her like slowly dying over the course of an episode or two, and then they have a funeral. I think it makes a lot more sense that she wakes up possessed by Dorothea. Maybe at some point Raquella comes to the forefront and tries to take possession, and they get some information from Raquella that's necessary about the prophecy, and then she dies.
Oh, I
Something like
hope that
that.
happens.
I feel like
That
that just
sounds
makes a
so
lot more
dramatic.
sense to me. Yeah,
And wouldn't it
yeah,
be interesting because uh, that would mean that Dorothea and Desmond have the same goal. Like Desmond made it clear this episode that his goal is to destroy the Sisterhood, and Dorothea at least has a grudge against Valia personally. I mean, in a funny way, like Dorothea and Desmond could join forces if it is that Dorothea continues influencing the story through Lila.
that'd be really interesting, actually. Um,
I'm gonna be
also,
disappointed if that doesn't happen now.
I know, right? I feel like, why am I getting the distinct impression that we're gonna end up like coming up with better theories than what actually happens in the show, and we're gonna see the ending of it, and we're gonna be like,
Mm,
oh, that's what they did.
mm.
That would suck.
I'll try
But
not to get my hopes up.
I know.
Yeah, well, I mean, that's what's fun about these kinds of stories is when they spark your imagination. That's what Frank
Yeah,
wanted to do. But yeah, we always hope that the story actually explores some of the cool ideas that it provokes.
yeah.
You know,
Oh, that.
I
Fingers
really,
crossed.
I really loved the portrayal of the other memory,
Oh,
and
Yeah,
yeah.
if you examine it, that totally looks like possession. That totally looks like what happens when someone becomes abomination, like where they have all the weight of all of these other memories, and the pressure of them is so strong that if the personality isn't if you don't have a substantial
Strong
enough
enough.
personality, if you're not strong
Hmm.
enough, it will overcome you. And I think that might be what we saw happen to Lila. Maybe she did convert the poison. We saw like some imagery of like the poison in her bloodstream and it moving. Maybe she did convert the poison, but the actual weight of the other memory was too much,
Oh,
and now
yeah.
she is possessed. And I just think about the ending of Children of Dune with
Hmm.
Alia, and like all the voices that came out of her, like begging not to die, like wanting to live and wanting to carry on, like all of these other memories, like reaching, grasping to coming to the surface. I just that'd be so cool to see. That'd be so cool.
Yeah.
But I also don't want them to take the wind out of the sales of like the Children of Dune thing that might happen in the future. But we'll see.
I hope it actually makes me so excited for future adaptations because this was like them laying the seeds for that.
Hmm.
And yeah, perfect, near perfect portrayal. I thought of, I love how they're just like ghost like in the
Hmm.
shadows at first in the catacombs and gradually coming to the surface. At first, it was weird to have like this mummy like face. I was kind of weirded out by that at first when Anna Roll had that and then it morphed into a face. But then when it morphed into someone else's face, into Dorothea, that was like, whoa, that is actually really cool. It's a really cool representation of the very feral, chaotic assembly of ego personas, and it just made me
Hmm.
super excited for the future to see Aaliyah's story faithfully portrayed. Hopefully that they've proven they can do that in a very effective way visually. It's exciting.
Great horror elements. It was scary. Like that was
Yeah.
freaky. Like the robed uh, women, the robed ancestors, and they're all crowding around. That was really. It was well done. It was well done. Definitely best scene in the whole show, in my opinion, so far.
Yeah, yeah, I agree.
I agree. Although I do have like nitpicks thematically
Let's hear him.
because because the way that that scene portrayed it was kind of about Lila struggling for life against death. Like Tula was saying to her, you know, reach for the light, reach for the life, escape
Hmm.
from these mummy, zombie, undead memories. And that's, you know, that's fine. But I think that part of what the Spice Agony is about in the books is that it's about a drug trip in which you feel connected to the universe and in which you
True.
lose your sense of self. And the way to survive the spice agony is to retain your sense of self and define your sense of self. You still have that connection to the infinite and you have that connection to all those other consciousnesses, but you know who you are. And I wish that this scene emphasized that struggle to retain the self better,
Hmm.
to retain the identity. Because, you know, that is a real experience that people can have is to lose the sense of self. Um,
On psychedelic drugs.
yeah.
It's
And
called
that,
ego death.
yeah. And I don't feel they were really capturing that here. Um, they made it feel more like she was just like struggling to stay alive against these against specters of death, which
Hmm.
was effective too. But it just keeps coming back to, you know, why did Frank write this stuff in the first place? And I think Frank was writing about the struggle to be individual against the weight of infinite knowledge and infinite possibility, and the way that knowledge can destroy the self. Um, is what I think Frank was writing about when he was writing Paul Atreides and Leto and so on.
Yeah.
Yeah. I also okay. I was gonna say I thought it was interesting that we see Tula creating the Rossic poison because it's the precursor to the Truth Sayer drug, and that was cool
Yeah,
to see because it reminds me too of like the honored Matres later on. They don't have access to spice, so they have to use some other drug to access certain Bene Gesserit like abilities. They don't have all of the abilities, but they can unlock some similar abilities through use of their drug, and it gives them like these red flakes in their eyes that look like fire. So it was cool to see the precursor to the Truth Sayer drug, and I wonder if this show season two later on if we'll see like the transition to them using the Truth Sayer drug because that'll be
yeah,
interesting.
Yeah, maybe that may be what it's pointing to. It seems that there's a lot of elements that maybe are establishing things we see in the movies with the Bene Gesserit and Spice. And yeah, I did get that impression too, that because this was the precursor to the spice, I'm trying to remember. I think in when Lady Jessica was being gifted the Wild Fremen Reverend Mother
Hmm.
memories, the Zensuni Wanderers, actually, there was a time they used the Rosic drug and until they
Hmm.
came to Arrakis. And they found it was more efficient or refined or something in that
Yeah.
process in regards to the other memory.
Yeah.
I don't know how that works with Brian Herbert stuff, like if that all fits together, but at least it kind of paves the way for something to be less efficient or not as we see it later with the spice. So
What we
yeah,
know,
there are things that are yeah.
I was gonna say they transitioned to the spice for a reason. So like there was obviously something about the Rossic poison that was potentially like more dangerous or like less refined. Maybe it just
Yeah.
wasn't as good as the Truthsayer drug at getting what needed to be done.
Oh, also that just made me think. The trailer for the next episode, they do a preview trailers. I did see Tula with a glass of orange liquid, and at first I didn't know what that was. I didn't put it together, but we see, yeah, it is orange, and then I think we see Lila in a some sort of tank or incubation chamber, and
Oh,
it looked like there
Wow.
was orange gas being pumped into it. It's
Well, you know what
like
that
a
is.
half a second, in the trailer. So I could be
oh
Okay,
wrong,
that
no, they're
but
not going to turn into a navigator, are they?
I
She's
know,
not going to be
right?
Norma Senva, the first navigator, is she? Oh
yeah.
boy.
Again, it was like a brief flicker, so I'm not sure if that what it was. But I did for sure see Tula with a glass of orange liquid.
It
That
could have
makes
been
me think
orange
of
juice, right?
that makes me think of a few potential things, right? So like maybe she's gonna try to heal her with spice to some degree. Maybe she's gonna give her some spice and it will fix her into to some degree. Maybe it'll trigger like a proper spice agony. I don't know. I'm just grasping at straws here because I didn't see what you were talking
Yeah,
about.
I don't
But
know
that
if
is
that would even
super
help.
interesting. Yeah,
Was
yeah.
more spice
Maybe that would just kill
poison
her.
work? Well, I guess she's already dead. Why not? Just give
Yeah,
it a
why
whirl.
not?
Yeah, yeah. She's in a coma because she took too many drugs.
Yeah.
Let's give her more drugs. That'll solve it. She was just taking the wrong drug. Let's just balance out her high. I agree that I'm glad that they're showing a different drug, that the Rossack poison or whatever it is, because there's a risk of making Dune all about the spice all of the time too much. Um, because Frank in the books was pretty clear that like spice is not the solution to all problems. Spice creates more problems than it solves. People's dependence on spice was a huge
I
problem,
know.
and the addiction is a huge
It's
problem. And
expensive too.
yeah, it's like it's one of several, and it's a tool of economic control. And like I don't want spice to just be like this magical pixie dust that makes everything better. I would like them to depict spice as the danger that it is.
Yeah. What are we thinking about this quote unquote prophecy? The key to the reckoning is one born twice, once in blood, once in spice. A revenant full of scars, a weapon born of war on a path too short. So,
It's
what are you
It's
thinking?
fun. It's funny because Frank Herbert never wrote a prophecy like that in Dune. Frank Herbert never wrote a riddle that has funny little symbolic
Yeah, George R. R.
metaphors to
Martin.
predict the future. Yeah, that's a lot more George R. R. Martin. When Frank writes about prophecy, he's usually writing about an artificial tool to control people, like the messianic prophecies that are around Paul and stuff. Like those aren't true prophecies; those are lies used to manipulate people. Or sometimes Frank is talking about plans, like the Kwisatz Haderach plan, which the Bene Gesserit have this prediction that, based on genetic science, that they're going to produce a particular kind of person. Frank never wrote like correct me if I'm mistaken, but I don't think Frank ever wrote a prophecy that was like a magical riddle that predicted the future.
Not
And so
exactly.
so I feel like I'll be a bit disappointed if this turns out to be like just a literally true prophecy that Raquel just saw. Like what Frank was more interested in was about writing predictions based on these social political movements and based on these personalities and psychology, I expect this will happen. And sometimes it comes true and sometimes it doesn't. Like that's more interesting than like a magic riddle, in my
Yeah,
opinion.
and to your point of not wanting it to be literal, it seems like the Bene Gesserit, Tula and Valia seem to think that the burning truth is literally the burning truth. So,
Mm.
and they seem to think that RFL is here right now. Because I think Tula says this to Lila before she takes the spice agony. She says Tyrion RFL is here now. So that's interesting. I don't know what to make of it. Like, are they simply mistaken and thinking that this is Tyrion RFL when it actually refers to something further in the future, or does Tyrion RFL just refer to something different in the show? But I don't know.
It seems that they think that Arafel is the destruction of the Bene Gesserit, that that's the
Okay,
scope of the destruction, just
so
the
they
threat
think
to their order solely.
that makes a lot of sense. Yeah, and that fits in line too with one of the later books, Heretics of Dune, when Odrade gets the God Emperor's message and he's talking about Arafel and he's talking about the end of the Bene Gesserit and like how all things end, especially if they don't like evolve. Um, so yeah, that makes a lot of sense.
I
Maybe
mean,
they're
yeah,
I was just gonna say maybe they're interpreting this threat as RFL, even though it's not actually the ultimate RFL.
it is interesting too that I wonder if they're just like they're kind of portraying their efforts to change the future, and maybe ultimately they'll end up just proving it or fulfilling it through these actions. And
That's what
that
Kasha said.
seems like a concept that's a primary theme in Frank Herbert's writings. That there's several. I mean, you just can't change destiny.
Hmm.
Sometimes that there are some things that were unchangeable. For Paul, he could mitigate some of the damage uh, with his jihad, the Fremen jihad, but it's still he was powerless to change things that he would have not gone down that road if he had a choice. So maybe they're trying to establish that, because I kind of get the sense that this is going to happen anyways, and maybe they're just misinterpreting the damage or the scope of the prophecy. It could just be a possible future, which is what I tend to think. But yeah, I don't know.
Yeah, I don't
Hmm.
think Frank ever was interested in like absolute immutable future destiny that you cannot change. Frank was
Yeah,
more interested in how can human agency affect things.
true.
And when the characters have prescient visions of the future, it's not an absolute destiny. It is a prediction based on enhanced awareness that may come true or may not, depending on human choice. And so that's why I'm a little wary of the magic riddle type thing. But another thing that Frank
Yeah,
always did is that he did constantly move the goalposts. Like there usually was not like a
Oh,
clear
true.
answer to this is what Arafel means. Because like earlier, like in book 3, Frank's going on about like Kralazek, the
Kralazek.
typhoon struggle. Like that is what is coming. And then of course, Paul's looking at the jihad. But then like even like, who is the Kwisatz Haderach? Like supposedly the whole story is about the Bene Gesserit creating the Kwisatz Haderach, and it's like, oh well, it's Paul. In book 1, they tell you that Paul is the Kwisatz Haderach, but then in book 3 they say, well, no, later the second is the Kwisatz Haderach, and then in book 4 they're like, well, maybe
Maybe it's
the
Duncan.
99th Duncan is actually the Kwisatz Haderach, and then in Heretics and Chapter House they're worried about creating a new one. So it's like there's always a different plan or prophecy about who the chosen one is, and there's always a different prediction of what the apocalypse is, whether it's Kralozek or whether it's Arafel or whether it's
Hmm.
face dancer robots that hunt down humans. So I think that it would fit that if the Sisterhood is expecting some kind of burning truth reckoning Arafel, but if it maybe is delayed or it turns out to be something else or it sort of is misinterpreted, and so
Yeah,
I think that makes sense to me.
it's very
Well,
nebulous.
didn't
Yeah.
Leto the Second say something like the goal of everything he did was to create a universe that could not be predicted? You
Yeah.
know,
Yeah.
the whole point is to like create a humanity that prescience doesn't mean anything. You know what I
Yeah.
mean? That you can't predict where they're gonna move and what they're gonna do and where they're gonna go. So I think that totally fits in line with I think that particular messaging.
Do
Yeah.
we think Desmond is the prophesied subject that she was talking about, or could it be Paul?
I don't think
Possibly.
it's a coincidence that they're worried about the burning truth reckoning when Travis Fimmel's walking around setting people on fire, trying to destroy
Yeah.
the Sisterhood. Like it's definitely connected.
That does seem very on the nose,
We
that
mentioned
part of it.
before we did the stream, like so he gets swallowed by the sandworm in that video hologram thing that the Emperor saw, and I was thinking about Heretics of Dune when Odrade and Shiana encounter the sandworm, and they can kind of see inside of it, and it's kind of glowing on the inside because there's a fire inside of the sandworms. There's like a furnace, and it's got fire inside of it. So I was thinking like he did get swallowed by the sandworm. He does have this fire power, and it supposedly came from his god. So I was thinking about like, how can this be connected? Is it connected at all, even in some tangential, thematic way? The Villeneuve movies and the show haven't really shown the whole furnace fire thing inside of the worms. That doesn't necessarily seem to be a part of it yet, but I think it's still something that could be possible. I don't know. What do you guys think about that?
Yeah, I
Yeah,
think
that's
that's a
my one
great.
critique of the worms. I wish that burning fire was in there.
Yeah, it's just
Yeah, I mean,
cool.
in fairness, I think Frank Herbert often forgot that he said that the sandworms have fire inside them
Yeah,
because
I
sometimes
don't
it's
think he
described
mentioned it
really
actually,
vividly,
yeah, till
and
later.
sometimes
Yeah.
there's like entire
I feel
books
like
that don't mention
true.
the fire at all. And obviously that's partly like it's the mythic dragon thing. Like Frank compared sandworms to like the dragons of myth guarding gold, like how the sandworms guard the treasured spice and so on. But
Absolutely.
yeah, I think that's such a great point, Quinn, because it's like yeah, if Desmond was swallowed by a sandworm, maybe the worm's fire gave him his firepower. And we were even speculating off stream that like what if this was something similar to Leto the Second's transformation in Children of Dune, when the little baby sandworms, the sand trout, envelop him and change his body and give him power and change. I think that it's reasonable to speculate that Desmond might have undergone a similar transformation, maybe involving sand trout, when he was taken by that worm. And wouldn't it be great and ironic if Desmond is, in some sense, like a proto early failed version of the God Emperor?
That
In a
makes
similar way that like Count Hasimir Fenring is like a proto failed version of the Kwisatz Haderach in Dune 1. So there
that's
is precedent for like a weirdo with weird powers who didn't quite come out right.
true, and that's really interesting because it does fit in with the weird whittle with the I can't talk with the weird riddle prophecy. The key to the reckoning is one born twice, once in blood and once in spice, right? So if he was born
Yeah.
again after being put back together by the sand trout somehow, that would explain that. And then also a revenant full of scars. If his body
Hmm.
was severely damaged by being eaten by the worm, and then the
Yeah.
sand trout theoretically came and put him back together, he would be full of scars. Maybe we'll
Yeah.
see a scene where he's taking off his clothes and he's got a bunch of scars because he's been put together by sand trout. We were joking earlier that maybe someone's going to stab him and just a bunch of sand trout would fall out.
Well,
Super gross.
it's funny
Definitely
too
also
because
George R. R. Martin like.
yeah, I also suspected it's a crazy theory, but with the connection to spice and the sandworms and how he could have possibly survived, I was thinking maybe he like the sandworm maybe dove in front of him and he sunk down so far into the sand that he actually went down to where the sand trout are in those little
Whoa.
caverns where they hide
Mm-hmm.
away the water,
Hmm.
Yeah.
and maybe that's how he somewhat survived. I just don't know. He could not have possibly survived a spice blow though, if that's how he got to the
Yeah.
surface. So yeah, I could poke holes in it, but I did think it was interesting also that he said, what did he say? Shai Hulud took my eye and granted me with a gift to see what
Yes.
even you cannot.
Yeah,
So
that
there's
was
got to
really
be some
cool.
connection there.
For any
Yeah.
oh, sorry. I didn't mean to interrupt you.
No, no, I'm
I,
done.
I was just gonna say for anybody that doesn't know about the sand trout. So the sand trout are a part of the life cycle of the sandworm. So you have all these tiny creatures called sand trout, and they swim around in sand, and they how exactly does it work? They go down and they like insist water.
Mm.
Like that is
Yeah.
kept at the surface, like underneath the rackus, right? And they link together and they insist water, and it creates this chemical reaction. It like mixes with whatever is inside of them, and eventually this creates a spice blow, and it goes to the surface and then it explodes. and then they go back down and they link together, and then years later they emerge as a single sandworm. Like a bunch of them become a single sandworm. So it's a life, weird alien life cycle that results in the creation of spice. Yeah. So the spice is a byproduct of the worm's life cycle. It's not worm poop. I always see people saying that it's a byproduct of their life cycle. So
I would say that it's less poop. It's closer to worm seed.
Remains.
yes.
Yeah.
Yeah, like Frank described it as like a sexual cycle,
hmm
and it's all connected to that sort of life and death imagery. But yeah, I mean, it got me thinking about the death of the God Emperor Leto in Book Four, and like,
Yes.
doesn't he just like go off into the sand, and then he sort of dissolves into the sand, and he like sort of seeds the planet with
He.
like
Yeah.
spice and sand trout? Isn't that what he does? Wouldn't it be cool
Yeah.
if Desmond did that at the end when he does?
Mm.
Oh.
Like, what if he, in some sense, like he contains that sandworm, sand trout spice essence, and he seeds the planet with that energy? Might be a really cool, weird ending for
Well,
him.
if you remember, the death of the God Emperor is described really disgustingly. Like he gets wet, and then like the sandworm segments start
Mm.
to come off, and like they like leave little holes, and they're like all squirming away. It's like a really, really gross. And then yeah, he eventually just like dissolves and like reseeds everything. So that'd be really interesting. Like so that would imply though, if that did happen in this, and Desmond did do that, that would imply that the worms by the time of Villeneuve's Doom are somehow changed from the original worms that are here.
Yeah.
Which would also beg the question, like, has this happened before? How many times have these worms stolen DNA from people and reincorporated it into their life cycle? I don't know.
Yeah, I
Uh,
mean, I mean, look, if it happened to Leto, the God Emperor, why not happen before? Why not happen after? Maybe every 10,000 years they just need some weirdo to just get swallowed up by worms as part of the sort of broader cycle of the spice. I mean, I really like the idea, which I'm sure you've talked about, Quinn, that like, what if the sandworms are the only actual extraterrestrial aliens in the Dune universe? Because like Dune is one of those rare sci-fis where there's many, many planets across the galaxy, but no aliens,
mhm.
apparently. So I love the idea that the sandworms are alien and that they must, in some sense, be kind of ineffable, unpredictable, different, and
Mhm.
the things they do to humans are so fascinating as a result.
Yeah, it's really interesting. There's a lot of interesting questions about the sandworm. I love the fact that it's so vague and that Frank Herbert didn't really talk a lot about it, like aside from like just like a few throwaway lines, like I feel like in like Children of Dune and maybe in like some other places about like the sandworms were brought to Arrakis from somewhere else. We don't really know, but
Mm-hmm.
they were brought here, and it kind of raises the question: are there other worlds out there that are full of sandworms and spice? Are there other forms of them, like in some distant part of the galaxy? It raises so many questions, and I think it's one of those things that really adds to the mystery of the series. It's a cool little thing that'll never be answered.
Maybe
Yeah.
some extragalactic aliens seeded Arrakis with sandworms to grant humanity the gift of spice to enhance their capabilities and allow them to evolve and develop. Maybe that's what happened.
Well, in that way, that would make the worms the version of the obelisk from
Yeah,
2001: A Space
Oh,
Odyssey.
yeah.
yeah.
That's cool to think about. I love that.
Well,
I love the mystery.
there's a lot of mysticism. I was talking about this in my review. There is a lot of mysticism tied to the worms and the humans' interactions with the worms. They are the gods of this entire planet, so it makes sense.
Yeah, and it was interesting. I guess we're thinking that Desmond is the subject of the prophecy. I don't know. I think it's the most obvious, but maybe that's too obvious.
It could
Don't know.
also. I think it's still possible that like he's ultimately a red herring, and that the prophecy
Yeah.
actually refers to something
I mean, if
further
it's
in the
ta-
future, and that it actually does refer to Leto the Second. But at this point in time, they don't have the information, so they think it
I mean,
refers
on a
to
path
Desmond.
too short, definitely seems to indicate the Kwisatz Haderach. But
Shortening of the
is
way.
Desmond Hart that? I mean, it could just be an early version, or
Mm-hmm.
like a precursor. What does he say to Valia when she asks him if he's a prophet? That was interesting too. That
What
he
does he
thinks,
say?
oh, he says, I would have said no at some point, like, or before I would have said no. Now I'm not so sure, something like that. So
Yeah.
Interesting.
maybe it's a prophet with the Kwisatz Haderach. I don't know.
Yeah, that
Hmm.
is another element to Desmond, is that he isn't just some guy with the power to set people on fire. He suggests that he has special insight and special vision, and that maybe he can see the future might be what's going on. And that also kind of makes sense within the sort of philosophy of Dune, because Frank constantly writes about how going through an ordeal and suffering and having to overcome a terrible obstacle is what gives you insight and the ability to survive. And so the idea that um, Desmond's brush with death gave him some special insight and ability to see the future makes some sense to me.
Let's talk about his interactions with Valia in this episode and the Emperor and the Empress, because all that was really interesting to me.
Mm.
Because I figured that the Empress would be on Desmond's side. Like even in the first episode before, like that became like totally clear because she was so against the marriage. I don't know. She just and she was so she seemed weary of the Bene Gesserit and their control and influence over the Emperor. So
Yeah.
it was cool to see Valia interrogate Desmond and him basically just tell her the truth. Because what's the point in lying? He's like, yes, I killed Pruitt. Yes, I killed Kasha. And I only care about what's best for the Imperium. And then that only works in his favor because ultimately she can only say that he's telling the truth because he firmly believes it's the truth. So that works in his favor in regard to the opinion of the Emperor and the Empress. And ultimately he's released, and now they're going to use him as this tool to keep the Landsrat under their feet. And I don't think this is going to work out good for House Carino. I think this is going to be very bad for ultimately for Javico. But it's interesting that now Javico has is doing this. Because I was wondering like where he stood like morally and ethically, like what links would he go to preserve his power. And now I'm starting to see more of it. What do you guys think about all that?
I think it's cool what you said, that like Desmond tells the truth. Like everyone else is a liar, everyone else is a political schemer, but he's the one guy that tells the truth. And it's like, oh, like how do we deal with someone who just tells you what they want and how they're going to do it, and then they do it? And like you say, like that's a cool antidote to the power of the Bene Gesserit truth sayers. And I'll note that like there are a lot of people in Frank Herbert's lore who resist the voice through
Yes.
self-control and through willpower. So it makes some sense that, Desmond might be someone who's able to resist the voice. I do feel that like Valia, on seeing that Desmond can resist the voice, should probably have just snapped his neck. I mean, like,
Yeah,
for real,
get
like
weird
that
and
would be the
way.
most. Yeah, like let's not forget that the Bene Gesserit are fighters, and maybe it's different at this point in the timeline, but it should be totally within Supreme Mother, Reverend Mother Valia's capabilities to kill Desmond. Um, but I guess she was just so
Y-
shocked that she felt she needed to retreat.
You're so right because I absolutely thought about that. I was like, grab the knife and do it yourself. Like you could, like the way the weirding way works, they're supposed to be able to move, especially in like closed quarters. They're supposed to be able to move really quickly, and it's almost like teleportation how fast they're moving. So she should be able to get over there and be behind him, and then just cut his throat yourself. But
Yeah,
yeah,
remember like how Jessica overpowers Stilgar, and this guy Desmond just
exactly.
took all of her power. He took her access to the throne. Like the level of damage that this guy just did to her, and the threat that he continues to pose, she should have killed him on the spot.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
I agree.
Um, yeah, especially since I think I knew beforehand that somehow they were going to use a voice. I think maybe it was in a review I read, and it was going to be portrayed that he would have these Bene Gesserit like powers, and the fact that he has seen the voice being used, that just blows the Bene Gesserit's agenda just wide open. These are abilities that particular abilities they don't let be known publicly, or else they'll be seen as a threat and a threat to their plans. So this is very
Mm-hmm.
interesting, and I wonder too because this whole time, or it's been clear to me with the Bene Gesserit, how they're handling their agendas. They seem very out in the open. I think, especially with this episode, it seemed very overt when Valia comes in and takes control of the situation with the Duke of Rachesi and his confrontation with the Emperor. It seemed a bit overt that Valia was ordering his truthsayer to get him under control and dismiss the Duke. And I was like, that's a bit over the top. And they're just
Yeah.
listening to them. And I wonder if that's intentional. Like maybe they just are reaching too far and are making themselves too obvious
Yeah.
to others of how much power and control they have. I don't know if that's the intent, that maybe Desmond is what's going to cause them to slink back in the shadows, but I hope that's the case, because so far they seem very just out in the open about how much power that they wield in the Imperium.
Yeah.
So
I get the
yeah.
Yeah, I
vibe
think
that. No, you go ahead.
the show started with the text "Victory is won in the shadows."
Yes.
So I think that's a really great point, Elaine, that maybe this show is about the Sisterhood realizing, oh, we need to be sneaky, sneaky. Like, we need to actually be a lot smarter and more sinister about this because we're being too overt. And, like, I thought that those scenes were really weak when Valia
Mm-hmm.
just walks into the Emperor of the Universe's throne room without an invitation, without making an appointment. He is surprised that she's coming in, and Valia, yeah, just like has Duke Ferdinand Rachesi dismissed, and then like Emperor Yaviko just like immediately submits to Natalia, even though we established that he doesn't listen to Natalia. There's nothing clever or subtle about what Valia and Natalia do in this scene. They just walk in and tell these powerful men what to do, and they immediately fold. And that felt
Yeah.
so silly to me. Like it just
Yeah.
felt so unrealistic that these arrogant, powerful rulers of the universe just do what they're told meekly. Whereas in the books, the Bene Gesserit are masters of subtle
Yeah.
psychological manipulation of like relationships and ideologies. They don't tell you what to do; they make you think it was your idea, you know. But there was none of that subtlety in those scenes.
Yeah. Well,
I
I
also
do.
thought that the sense of scale was so weak. Like you've seen
Uh
those
huh.
like Mark Simonetti artworks of the Emperor's throne
Yeah.
room,
Holy
and
shit.
you look
Yeah.
at that artwork and it's like, oh my god, the Padisha Emperor of the universe, he rules over hundreds of worlds. Like the scale is so immense, the power is so immense. Like you don't get an appointment with the Emperor unless you schedule it on his calendar like a decade in advance, because there's just so much going on, and it's so weighty. But in these scenes, it was just like three guys standing around. Like there were no guards, there were no courtiers, there was no sense of scale. And again, like this is 10,000 years prior to June, so maybe the situation, the Carinos are meant to be weak at this time, so I guess that kind of makes sense. But yeah, I thought that the sense of scale was weak, and it was lame how overt and unsubtle the sisters were. I agree.
I also agree with you guys. I think that a point I think that the point of the show, or at least one of the points of the show, is going to be showing how the sisterhood moved more into the shadows and how they kind of altered their way of doing things and their way of thinking. Because in the beginning they're talking about how we need to get a sister on the throne, and we talked about like how that's not the way they operate by the time of Paul Atreides. And thinking about it now, I did get the sense in that final scene that Valia was kind of questioning everything at that point, and maybe that was the reason that she didn't kill Desmond, because maybe she's like, maybe the way I'm doing things and the way I'm operating right now isn't helping. So maybe I just need to take a step back and recuperate and just like think about what my plan is and how we're going to handle things at this point. Because yeah, I think that's a part of the show. I think, how do they develop from this sisterhood into the Bene Gesserit that we
Yeah.
know, who steer politics from the shadows, who only live to serve? How do we get to this place from like where you can't just bust into the Emperor's throne room? Like, what are you doing?
Yeah.
Like, by the time the
Yeah.
Bene Gesserit we know say they only live to serve, and they're very sneaky about it. Like, if you're not looking closely, you just think they're a school for girls. You just think they're these nuns. So it shouldn't be so obvious, and you're right. And also, I'm starting to feel like the sign language is a bit too obvious. Like the zooming in on the hands and like the I'm like, I would notice. I would notice these two women that are dressed exactly the same giving each other hand signals and looks. I don't know how no one in the room is noticing. So,
I mean, it's always that difficult thing where how do you show this subtle stuff visually? And
mhm.
I think for the purposes of the TV show, I don't mind the close-ups and the heavy breathing and the like. That's not so bad. But in terms of like the dialogue and the interpersonal stuff, we're not seeing enough of that manipulation. And I agree. I hope that we see them become more subtle. And I agree. Like some of these scenes when the young sisters are like chatting in the library and they're like gossiping and animated and they're just acting like normal teenagers, right? And that is good because it makes them more relatable characters. But it doesn't feel like the modern Bene Gesserit to me. Like the modern Bene Gesserit, I get the sense that they're a more hardcore, austere cult.
Yeah,
Like they're not having quite as much fun as these young sisters are.
yeah,
And so I hope that you're right, Quinn, and I hope that what we see is a transformation into a more devoted, hardcore, shadowy sisterhood. And like, I mean, look at the imagery in the Villeneuve movies. It was so beautiful, the Bene Gesserit imagery, when they are these veiled witches in black walking through shadows,
oh
literally.
my God,
Like
so good.
Gaius is flanked by those sisters who are veiled. You don't even see their faces, and the sense of mysticism. I mean, read like the end of Dune when like Gaius is standing behind the Emperor, and like at least until she's humiliated, she like just her presence is like, oh, like this is serious. This is the
Hmm.
Reverend Mother. Like we don't mess with her. Like we don't have that weight yet at this point in this prequel, which makes sense because they haven't established their weight quite so much. And like you said, like I mean, I think Valia is a radical. Like the series started with her having Dorothea murder herself. Like Dorothea was the more conservative one. Valia is the more overt, direct, ruthless one. And so, yeah, I agree, and I hope that this show will explore her questioning her methods. And Tula also represents that, questioning Valia's extreme methods. So
Yes.
I think those are all good, relevant questions.
I think Valia said at least once in this episode that she thinks that someone or something is behind Desmond's actions. So
Mm,
she seems to believe that there's some other outside force that is controlling Desmond. That there's some other entity, maybe like a group or a person that is behind Desmond and that he's not acting on his own fruition. Now,
mm,
I know you were we had a mini discussion about this earlier, um, and you were saying AltshiftX that like it might just be that he has a personal vendetta that's tied to something that happened in his past that's related to the
mm,
Bene Gesserit and their influence on the Imperium. So that's
mm,
entirely possible, and she just assumes that there is some political reason because she's thinking that's just the way her brain is set at this point in time, and she's not her mind isn't maybe open to the idea that he just has an emotional vendetta against us for like whatever reason, and
yeah,
that he
there's like an
actually believes
arrogance
this to the
to it.
core of him. Mm-hmm.
Like Valia thinks, oh, there's no way this guy could be doing all this by himself. There's no way this guy has just a human, emotional, personal motivation. No, he has to be part of some elaborate political conspiracy. I think it would be so humbling for Valia to show that no, he's just a guy who, by his own power, is taking action because he's pissed at the actions of your sisterhood. And I mean, just to speculate wildly, like, what is Desmond's grudge against the sisterhood? What if Desmond is Lila's father? Because that's one of the other mysteries I
Dun
want to talk
dun
about
dun.
is like who are Lila's
Mm.
parents? I thought it was super mysterious that Lila's mother wasn't present during her agony, and I want to hear what you
Yeah.
guys think about that. But like there's so many mysteries in this show. I feel like some of them have to be interconnected. Like if Desmond was Lila's father and Lila was taken from him, I like it's just wild speculation, but that might be a
Why?
possible explanation for why he's so mad.
I think that's a cool theory. And why wasn't her mother present? I didn't know what to make of that Dorothea line when she says
Yeah.
when Lila says mom and she goes, "Is that what they told you?" What is that supposed to
Mm.
mean? Like why
Yeah.
isn't her mom there? Like I'm like that's a very interesting thing to say. Is that what they told you? Why wouldn't her mom be there? I don't get that.
Yeah,
That's
how
I don't
could her
know.
mother not be there?
Hmm.
And to clarify, like, so Raquella, the first Reverend Mother, is Lila's great great grandmother.
Yes.
Dorothea is Lila's grandmother, and the mystery is who is Lila's mother,
Yes.
and why the hell wasn't she at the agony? Because yeah, like
Hmm.
if her mother's not there, I'm like, well, does she? does she not have a mother? Is Lila a Gola? Is she a clone? Did she come
Yes,
out of an axolotl tank? Like, I'm trying to think, like, how can she not have a mother?
exactly. My
That's
mind went
interesting.
to my mind went to like maybe she's just a Gola of Raquel, but that's impossible because the ego memory of Dorothea is there. So I don't know.
Well, when it comes to Desmond, now we have, I guess, confirmation from this episode that, um, okay, so the part with Kieran Atreides, I kind of, I don't know, it wasn't that immersive for me, but from that, the lady with the blue eyes, that was the same
Michaela.
Bene Gesserit that was meeting with Valia later, right?
Yes. Yes.
Okay,
Michaela.
so she was involved in the rebel attack. That was the rebel attack on, I assume, from Desmond's, uh, uh, the attack on that harvester
Yeah,
that he was
yeah,
involved
it could
in.
be.
So
I
if
think so, but I'm
she's,
not 100% sure, or if they were referencing something else.
yeah,
But
but if there are Bene Gesserit on Arrakis that are involved in these operations, could that be the connection with Desmond
Yeah,
there?
that's a
it
great point. Maybe
very well
Desmond
may be.
knows that the Bene Gesserit were responsible for attacks on harvesting, and maybe that killed some of his friends or family, and maybe that's what he's mad about. Yeah.
Absolutely, that's definitely a possibility.
And
That
I didn't even
Go
think
ahead.
about that until you had that theory. Like, oh, maybe that's why they established that.
Hmm.
that is one of the things I enjoyed in this episode was seeing how the Sisterhood's playing each side. Like the
I was gonna say
Sisterhood's
that.
like helping Emperor Yaviko, but simultaneously undermining Yaviko by attacking the spice harvesting operations. And there's that bit where Value comes up to Michaela and is like, "Yeah, you know what? We actually need to stop undermining Emperor Yaviko. He's too undermined. He's useless. We've gone too far. We need to go in the other direction. Pump this guy up." And so now we actually need to oppose his rebels and don't let him get taken down. That is very Sisterhood to me.
Well,
That is what the Bene Gesserit do. So I liked that.
and they hinted at that in the first episode where they said something like, "We'll advise him from Solutus Secundus while continuing to weaken him on Arrakis" or something.
Yeah,
So
yeah,
they hinted at it, and you're so right. That is the aspect that I like seeing. I like seeing how the Sisterhood they're playing every angle. They're always manipulating you. And I like that the show is simultaneously showing us that and showing us how they're doing that. And then also at the same time showing us that Desmond is totally right about everything he's saying about them.
yeah.
Everything that he's saying that they're doing, they actually are doing. So can you really be that mad at him? You know?
And that's the paradox of the Bene Gesserit throughout the whole series is that they are smarter than everyone in the room, and they're still wrong because their plans to control the
Yeah.
universe still usually backfire and
Yeah.
still aren't sufficient. And that is always what Frank is doing is that he's like there's always some gigabrain megamind who comes up with a plan to save the world, but it's always not smart enough because there's always another challenge and there's always another adversity and there's always so yeah I enjoy that. And also, of course, like, you know, the Bene Gesserit undermining and like the Bene Gesserit participating in rebellions against the Imperium in a controlled way. It reminds me of how the God Emperor Leto in Book 4, like how he deliberately cultivates rebellions against
Yeah.
himself as a way of making the human species stronger. And I think as a way of just not being bored over the
Yeah.
centuries. So this is similar too.
Please read God Emperor of Dune, guys. It's so freaking cool if you guys haven't read it. It's so he's Leto the Second is so insane and funny and like just savage and brutal. Like
Yeah.
he will have you and all your friends executed while laughing. But he's not
Yeah.
evil. He just
But
has to be he's bored.
yeah, and he's doing it for a moral point. Like he's impossibly cruel and he's impossibly self-sacrificing and he's lecturing you as he drops you into the pit of acid. It's if there's anything you enjoy about what we're talking about, the deeper side of Dune in these streams, you should read Frank's books, especially God Emperor. But I mean, some like I was thinking today about like, okay, how is this show different to the Dune books? What is it that is special that's in the Dune books that this show isn't fully capturing? And I think that there's a big tonal difference, and there's a big difference in the characters, in the sense that most of the characters in the show are pretty relatable, having pretty relatable relationships. The Dune
Yes.
books are not like that. In the Dune books, most of the characters are extreme weirdos who are pushing an abstract psychological political agenda. Everyone in the Dune books has like a really weird and intense plan and perspective, and they are ruthless in their pursuit of it. And there are some relatable relationships and emotions, but they really take a back seat. And the primary thing that they're talking about is pushing their weird agenda in their intense, extreme way. And like everyone is saying one thing, but they have 5 other layers hidden beneath the surface that is what is really motivating them. And obviously, that's an incredibly difficult thing to put on a screen adaptation. And I think that almost every Dune screen adaptation has failed to capture that feeling. The Villeneuve movies did an okay job of that in some extents, but I don't think this show captures that sense. Like I think Valia is the best character in this show, maybe Desmond, but I think Valia does give you that sense that, oh, she has plans that she's not telling us. Like Valia
Yes.
and Tula, they talk about their history, they talk about their secrets, and like we know that Valia is trying to like push the Sisterhood and control the universe, but we don't really fully know why, and we don't really fully know how. And so I think in that sense, Valia is the closest to capturing the sense of the Dune books, but overall, most of these characters, you do not get the sense that these characters have like deep secret ideologies and agendas in the way that the characters of the Dune books do.
Yeah,
Yeah.
some of
Grant
them are
over.
pretty one-dimensional, not very.
Mm.
But yeah,
I
I agree with you
agree.
about Valia.
I agree, and I agree that it's like really hard to portray that on screen. And you know, a lot of like what we see in Dune too is it takes place like within the mind of a character, so it's really hard to portray that. And like you said, every Dune adaptation definitely does suffer from not being able to portray that. It's a difficult thing. It's really hard. But we got a super chat. I just want to like look at it. What do you guys think of the Bene Gesserit vis-a-vis the evolution of secular occult versus the church? Now, are you asking me a question about real history? Because I just read science fiction and fantasy books. So, I do not know. I don't know. I really don't know. I really don't know.
I think we talked last week about how it's interesting how the Bene Gesserit cynically use religion as a tool, but at the same time, they kind of are a religious organization, despite their
Hmm.
insistence that they are a secular organization. Um, and so I think they explore that a bit in this show. Does that kind of address the question? I don't understand the question either.
I think the question is about. I don't know what the
Yeah, I'm
question
not
is
sure.
about. I think the church is in reference to like the Catholic Church and the secular occult. I don't know. Is that things like Satanism because that's secular and also like a cult? They don't actually like believe in the God. I don't know. I don't know
That is one of the
because
fun
they are
things
like
in
a
the
form of like pseudo religion. Like the Bene Gesserit do operate like a pseudo religion.
And they
They
use
absolutely
religion,
do. Hmm.
obviously. But yeah, the way they're structured and the way they operate. How did I think it's in the first book too that they are the way they're structured, the way they operate are wholly religious, but they
yeah,
themselves would say they are not. Um,
yeah.
Yes.
And that's something that Frank Herbert grappled with throughout his books is that he was very cynical about religion and the power of religion to control people and the power of religion to mislead people. But Frank was also really interested in um, feelings of one's connection to the universe and feelings of spiritual feelings. And while he was cynical about religion, he also found a lot of wisdom in Zen Buddhism and in other philosophies and religions. So I think the Bene Gesserit reflect that. And there's also that weird world building about like the council that invents a new Bible, like the committee, the CIT sits down and creates the Orange Catholic Bible, which is a holy
Yeah.
text created by committee, and they're like, well, let's end all religious conflict by smushing together all the good bits from every religion, and then we'll have one religion that everyone loves and agrees on. And the
Well,
consequence of that is massive destructive riots across the universe, and it
yeah.
doesn't solve any problems.
mm.
And millennia later, the OCB, the Orange Catholic Bible, is a popular religious text, but it seems to have been a folly to try and artificially control religion in the way that the CIT did.
I think it was a reference to, you know, like the death of Constantine and the Council of Nicaea, because
Oh yeah.
Constantine was baptized on his deathbed, And then the Council of Nicaea is when they took like all the books of the Bible and decided what was going to go in the Bible and what they were going to like borrow and like what they were going to change, and they put it all together. And that's, the Bible that we have. So maybe that's the loose reference potentially.
Sure. And of course, there's like the Frank's interested in the development of the Fremen religion and the Zen Sunnis, who seem to be a combination of like Sunni Islam and Zen Buddhism. And there's a mention of like the third Muhammad, like a third Islamic prophet appearing at some point thousands of years in our future and altering the trajectory of religion. So he's really interested in the way that ideas change and combine and conflict, and the way that that influences people's thoughts and philosophies thousands of years in the future. I don't know. I don't know if this show like has the balls to actually engage with any of that. Like that's what kind of concerns me about this show. Like it's too
Uh-huh.
scared to say Butlerian jihad. It's not addressing religion in any kind of direct way. It's
Mm-hmm.
I mean it is introducing the breeding records, which is one of the other really sort of uncomfortable, controversial aspects of the Bene Gesserit, which is that they are eugenicists. They
Yes.
practice eugenics, manipulating
Mhm.
bloodlines. Like they consider some people's genetic makeup to be superior to other people's genetic makeup, which is obviously a really uncomfortable and controversial idea.
For
And yet
sure.
they are centering that in this show. So I wonder where they're going to go with that.
And they were holding like well in the very beginning of the showing the young Valia and Tula that part, they were all holding orange Catholic Bibles around
Mm-hmm.
Animal's deathbed. It seemed, but they never speak about them. And Dorothea would she's the one that said, "Thou shalt not disfigure the soul." I think that
Yes.
was as maybe that's as far as they're gonna go into with that. I don't know.
Mm-hmm.
They haven't
Yeah,
mentioned it since.
I feel it kind of makes no sense for the Bene Gesserit to be believing in the Orange Catholic Bible. Like, I think they might use that as a tool. I think the Bene Gesserit's religious beliefs probably have more to do with like the Zen Prana Bindu principles that like Frank was into. But again, like this is 10,000 years prior. The Butlerian Jihad like just happened. The OCB like just happened. So I guess we're in a time of change. And I like how the conflict between Valia and Dorothea reflects that
Mm-hmm.
upheaval and uncertainty. Like the Sisterhood is still figuring out who they are and what their ideology is. So I hope that they get into the meat of it more.
I want to say that everyone's correcting me about the Council of Nicaea. Thank you. Like I said, I only read fantasy and sci-fi books. I don't know about history. Don't ask me a question about history. As I said, okay. What do you guys think about the Emperor and how like vulnerable he is right now? I think he's dead by the end of the show. At this
Oh,
rate,
really?
I mean, the Emperor is being manipulated by everyone around him. I don't think that it ends well for the Emperor. What do you guys think?
It seems that he's getting. I hope that they're laying the groundwork for this, but it seemed like he was very much having little to no control in this most recent episode. And if that leads to more desperate actions, which I guess it does because he lets Desmond go and he's like his gonna go forth and be his weapon of war. We do see him later in trailer footage in front of his soldiers, so he's gonna have a prominent position. If it leads to him being more desperate and making moves that are, I don't know, that maybe lead to the creation of the Sardaukar as we come to know them, or a precursor to that later,
Mm-hmm.
that could be interesting. I hope that's the case. I want to see him take more action though in his desperation and take more in his bid for more control.
I see him as very reliant on everyone else. He's reliant on either his wife's counsel or Kasha or now Desmond. I feel like he doesn't seem strong. He doesn't seem strong willed enough to survive the forces that are at work against him. And
Yeah.
and I think they're setting up Ynez to take rule eventually. So I see the Emperor as I think he's kaput. What do you think? Shift
Yeah, I think that Yaviko reminds me of uh
Salvador.
Salvador in the Sisterhood of Dune book, which this series is loosely inspired by. Because Salvador is also like just kind of a dunce. Like he kind of has some good intentions, but he just doesn't have the follow through, and he relies on the advice of everyone around him to survive. And I think technically, like in this show, Havoko is the grandson of Salvador. No, sorry, the uncle of Salvador. They're doing sort of weird things with the
Yeah.
canon, but
Mm-hmm.
I do find it kind of charming how in this universe of like ruthless, smart politicians, the Emperor's just kind of a dunce who's being manipulated, and it is similar to Emperor Shaddam, who's the Emperor in the first Dune book and movie,
True.
which is kind of fun. So yeah, I agree, Elena. It'd be really funny if Havoko like lashes out and he's like, yeah, I'm actually gonna assert myself and do something radical to prove that I'm a good leader. And if it just blows up in his face and causes his downfall, I mean, using Desmond kind of is that. It might be that using Desmond is what leads to his downfall, and I agree, Quinn, that Ynez might be the Empress in the end. And I think that if that happens, I'd like to see. They've got to give Ynez an arc, because, like,
Yeah.
I think her arc is that she's realizing, oh, I'm going to have to let go of Kieran, and I'm going to have to be a bit more serious and self-controlled, which is similar to, like, what Anna does in the Sisterhood of June book. Um,
Mm-hmm.
so yeah, I'm curious to see how it goes, and I do find Yabiko one of the more interesting characters to watch.
I want to say, if you guys are still listening, hit the like button. We've got like almost 1,000 people still watching, so hit the like button.
Nice.
Yeah, hit the like button.
Subscribe to Quinn's
Ah,
Ideas. Subscribe to
yes,
Nerdcookies.
sweet. Oh, and I'll put the links in the description. I totally forgot. But
I was gonna say,
yeah,
I actually did like Princess Inez more in this episode than previously. I mean, they're finally there's like some character growth there. I did like the scene where she's just heard news of Kasha's murder or death, and she's just doing those Bene Gesserit exercises to regain her control. I thought that was kind of
that was a
I
cool
like that
scene.
scene. Yeah, and there was some, I think, meaningful character growth there. But with like some other characters, I'm just not feeling it, and they feel like they're just here
Kieran.
to be part of the ensemble. But I feel like we're wasting time on some moments. But at least for Princess Inez, this was the first time I think I felt like there's some substantive character growth here, and at least she's connected to the main plot of the show, which is centered around the Bene Gesserit's agenda, and she's involved in that and has that personal connection to Kasha, so she has a personal stake in this. And that's probably it. I'm just not getting the emotional weight from some of these other characters, and I feel like we could just trim the fat here a little bit because I feel like it's bogging down these cool moments that I wish we could expound upon more, or use that time wisely in that regard. But
One thing
because
Yeah,
I
I
I
wanted to talk
agree.
about. Okay,
Go
I
on,
was just
Quinn.
gonna say one thing I wanted to talk about was Valia and Kieran Atreides, because when Michaela says Atreides, she gets this look on her face, and the connection between Valia and House Atreides, not in House Harkonnen, is still we're not sure exactly like what's happening, like how she feels about House Harkonnen at this point, and the feud between House Harkonnen and House Atreides. So it's interesting that she kind of gave Michaela a look when that happened, and she was like, "Is that all right?" And she's like, "Fine." And so Kieran is doing this vague rebellion against the Emperor, and Valia knows about it now. So I
I'm surprised she
wonder
didn't know. I
what
mean,
becomes of that. I know. I was literally about to say that. Like, how do you not?
Kasha
Aren't you
knows.
communicating? Aren't you communicating back and forth? You should. You're the mother superior. Like, you should know.
Totally
Oh,
agree. Totally
Film
agree.
Comics Explained. What's up? Thanks for the gifted memberships. How's it going?
Hello.
How's it going, man? Thank you so much.
Yeah, I mean they started the show by having Valia talk about the Harkonnen feud with the Atreides. So it is something that they've like alluded to, but yeah, they've never quite explained what Valia's feelings are. Because in the Sisterhood of Dune book, like kind of why Valia is interesting is that she um is joining the Sisterhood to push her Harkonnen agenda. And
Yes.
she's kind of undermining the Sisterhood for her personal reasons, which is absolutely not what you meant to do. So I wonder if that element will be explored here, whether it's by Valia in the present or by Valia in the flashbacks. It looks like next episode is largely going to be a flashback episode to Valia's past. So I am curious to see what they do there.
I've definitely been wondering about that, and I said in our last stream that I think that I think that in the show version of the canon, that she does start off with a similar motivation to the Valia Harkonnen from the book,
Yeah.
but I think that she ends up having a deeper connection to Raquella than the book version. Because in the opening of the show, she says, "I met my true mother," and I don't think she's lying to the audience when she's saying that. And I don't feel like
Yeah.
Raquella. I don't feel like Valia from the book would say that Raquella was her true mother. So
Yeah.
I think the connection was deeper, and that she actually developed a genuine love, dare I say, for the sisterhood, and I think she genuinely developed. Um, I think she developed a sense of care for the sisterhood. Yeah, I don't know how to say it, but yeah, I think she shifted at some point. And now 30 years later, I'm wondering, like, does she still have a little bit of that, like, I want to do what's best for House Harkonnen in her mind, or is that totally suppressed by her desire to lead the sisterhood to victory and success and longevity?
Yeah. Maybe there'll be a confrontation between her and Kieran when the rebellion's happening. Like maybe because I mean, what's just happened is that Valia came to the palace to say, "Hey, Yaviko, Kieran Atreides is about to rebel against you." But then
Yeah.
Desmond prevented that from happening, and Valia left. So I guess next couple of episodes, Kieran's rebellion is going to happen successfully because Yaviko was not warned by Valia, or maybe Valia will like jump in a window and like kill Kieran and like save the Emperor and get back into the Emperor's good graces or something. But yeah, that might be a consequence. But yeah, I agree, Quinn, that like the relationship between Raquella and Valia seems stronger, and we should remember that Raquella exists in Valia's other memories still, and that's something that they haven't really acknowledged in this show. Is that like yes, you can see your ancestors when you undergo the agony to become a Reverend Mother, but those other memories don't go away. They are there in the back of your mind at all times, and sometimes they are overwhelming, and you can have conversations with your ancestors. Valia should still be in conversation with Raquella and all her other ancestors. And so I hope that they acknowledge that and they explore that because that's part of the point and the power of being a Reverend Mother.
Honestly, when Tula was doing the Rossic poison and that Bene Gesserit walked up, the older one, I thought that was another memory. I hadn't really noticed that
Mm,
character before, so I thought, like, is she talking to like one of her ancestral memories right now? But no, it was just an older Bene Gesserit or woman of the Sisterhood. So, so I actually thought that that's what they were doing in that scene. But yeah, they should be able to talk to uh, the other memories to some degree. Now, it is questionable, like, to what extent all Reverend Mothers can do this and how much control they have over it and how potentially random it can be. Because I know that Leto the Second and his sister Ganima have, like, very good control over it. And I remember in Children of Dune, they compare, like, their abilities to Aaliyah, and they say something like she didn't have the same control over the intricacies of her internal world. And I don't
yeah.
know if that just was because she was possessed or if it's just, I think their powers were just more like refined than hers were because of, for several reasons. I don't know. But yeah, there's degrees to which they can access these memories. It might come and go. Maybe she can't access it at all points in time. Because I
And
also
this
think
is
that if she could, why wasn't she? She should have been. Yeah, like you said, she should have already been in constant communication with
yeah.
Raquella. So,
I think
Mm.
Chula made a comment like you can't tame the other memory, which
hmm
I didn't like because you kind of do have to tame the other memory, at least how it's
yeah,
described by Leto and by them. Because like the reason why the agony is often deadly, it's not just like failing to transmute the poison. It's the fact that your sense of self disintegrates and is consumed by the other memories, and your ancestors just rip your sense of selfhood apart. Like that's the danger, and I think that's part of what was not captured by the agony scene this episode. You do have to tame the other memories. There's also that hilarious line in like book 4 in God Emperor when the God Emperor just like offhandedly mentions, "Oh yeah, by the way, I am not Leto Atreides anymore. No, I'm actually like an 8th century barbarian
I
called Harum,
know.
and like I'm actually just that guy. Like
Nice.
Leto died ages ago. I'm a completely different person." And it's like, what? Like
I
is
was gonna
Leto
mention
joking? Like
that.
we don't even know. But like but that's what is so scary about the other memory is that it does make you less yourself. When you have that degree of insight and connection, you are no longer really an individual human person. You're like a scary hive mind. And I hope that, like, in this TV show, like, this is a show about the Bene Gesserit guys. This has never happened before. This is a fantastic opportunity to explore some of those weird and bizarre and esoteric details of
True.
who the Bene Gesserit are. So the fact that they're making a Bene Gesserit TV show and they have not explored what it means to have other memory, it's a real missed opportunity if they don't explore it.
Since you brought that up, that is a really cool thing that happens in at the end of Children of Dune, where Leto the Second is like doing the spice agony, and he's preborn, so he's worried about being possessed, and he basically has to like combine his ego with this ego of like this
Yeah.
Egyptian pharaoh, and they become
Yeah.
like this whole different thing. And it's so cool. And by the end of it, he's like talking like, and he's talking to what's his name? Faradin, right? Faradin. And Faradin just
Yeah.
thinks he's like insane. He's like, "What are you even saying to me right now? You're crazy." It's insane. And it's also cool what Ganima does. Like Ganima uses her mother's ego memory,
Mhm.
Chani,
Mm.
like to kind of hold the other memories at bay. So
Mm.
maybe that's something that we might see with Lila. Maybe that's the reveal. Lila's mom will come out and I don't know, block them out. But then again, taking the wind out of the sails of Doom of later stuff if they do that. So we'll see.
Yeah, this seems like a good way to, have the breadcrumbs leading to that. And I do love that they, foreshadowed that this is a glimpse, even a fraction of the chaos that the preborn have to contend with. And
Yeah.
I mean, with Lila, she was, I don't know how old she is. She's teenage years, adolescence.
Yeah.
She's somewhat trained and she's old enough to have, a stronger sense of self, but she was way too untrained or not prepared enough for this ceremony yet. And so it's even just a fraction, just teasing like the true chaos that the preborn have to endure. And that is really cool how what we see with Aaliyah, but also later with the twins, how you have to have a strong ego presence to kind of command the others, keep them in line in order to maintain the individual sanity.
Yeah. Frank Herbert
It's
was
really cool.
tripping. He was tripping balls on drugs and he was like, "How do I control this?" You know, that's a thing that happens when people do psychedelics. It's like it's a thing where even your own thoughts can seem like they're coming from other people. And so that's why people will attach like mysticism to psychedelic experiences because it does feel like a very spiritual experience. And like if people that have experienced psychedelics and they read Dune and they can see like the threads of similarity, it's obvious like where that comes from. That's really interesting.
I thought Lila's agony scene was powerful and fun, but wouldn't it have been cool if we saw all of that at intensity and we saw Lila grappling with these ancestral mothers? But then what if the show made the connection and we turned to Valia, we turned to Chula, and we turned to the other Reverend Mothers, and we're like, oh my god, that's what they have inside their heads all the time. Like the
Jeesh.
sense of like vertigo and scale, if we were like, oh my god, like that is what it is like to be her, and maybe it's not as intense as the agony at all times, but if they just made that connection so that we could have a bit more understanding of like, oh my god, that is the power and the horror of the Reverend Mothers, would have been really cool.
That's what Jessica says in Villeneuve's Dune. You will see
Mm,
the power and the horror or something like that. But yeah,
mm,
that would be so cool. Like they're always trying to keep the other memories at bay, keep them in check. Maybe it's not as intense as someone that could potentially become abomination, but it is to some degree there's this multitude of egos and memories that are always vying for a little bit of the surface. So yeah,
mm.
that's freaky. That's freaky. And it would show like, yeah, it would show like the weight that each Reverend Mother is carrying around with her at all times.
We mentioned how Ynez does some sisterhood training to calm her emotions when she finds out about the deaths, which, I guess implies that Ynez, she's not a part of the sisterhood, but she has received some sisterhood training from Kasha, a bit like how Princess Irulan got
Irulan.
some sisterhood training. Um, and Valia in the episode says, "Oh, Ynez, you're so good at that. You're definitely going to become a Reverend Mother." Do you guys think that was a lie. Like, is Valia just flattering Ynez so that
Well,
she can
yeah,
use her politically?
Oh yeah, probably.
absolutely. Of course she's doing that. She's just like, yeah, totally. Yeah, you'll totally be one of us. Like, absolutely. Like, you'll be the greatest ever. Like, why wouldn't she? It's like, yeah, like if I'm losing the Emperor, I've got to keep my hooks in Ynez. And that's why she sends Theodosia as well, because she's like, we've got to keep our hooks in Ynez because she is the future of the Imperium. So absolutely, she wants to flatter her and make it seem like, yeah, you can be a part of us and you can be on our side and you'll have great power and great control like we do.
So I wonder if Ynez will defy the sisters at some point. Like, Ynez will realize that she's being manipulated. She'll realize that her lover Kieran was manipulated by the sisters, and she might reject their control. That would make a lot of sense, I think.
Maybe, or I could also see it going the other way, like it ends with her like aligning with the Sisterhood, and that she's like, okay, I'm on their side actually, because I
Yeah.
mean, by the time we get to Paul Atreides, they're in, like they're in everybody's house. No one really questions them. Like
Yeah.
everyone, yeah, they're everywhere. So I don't know.
She does seem fully indoctrinated. I know she's her relationship with Kasha, that was the only one that seemed that she felt the most towards, and obviously she was devastated when Kasha died. I feel like she was closest to this character, which as
Yeah,
opposed to she has a lot of family around, but I only really ever got that she was had a real genuine connection to this particular Bene Gesserit. So I think she's fully indoctrinated, I guess, at this point, and um, that's where her family is, and that's where whose goals, I guess, she that ultimately align with her own. It seems that's what they're trying to pave the way for.
well, yeah, the Bene Gesserit get him young, and I think I remember in the first episode they said they she met her when she was a young girl. So if they get their hooks in young, I feel like absolutely she's probably gonna lean towards favor to the Bene Gesserit over Desmond and even her parents. That's
Yeah,
what I'm
because
thinking.
when you compare the scene with Inez and a scene with her mother, and then a scene with Inez and Kasha, there's definite difference there. She definitely has more of genuine feelings for Kasha in that regard, more than
Yeah,
that,
her
more
mom's giving her
maternal
advice.
feelings. Yeah.
Her mom's giving her advice, and she's like, "Mom, I don't need your advice. I know what
And
I'm
that's
doing."
what is so sad for Empress Natalia is that both her daughter and her husband like Kasha more than her. And it's a political thing, but it's also just a personal thing. She feels rejected by her family, and that's horrible. And so that makes her turn to, yeah, I'll hang out with this wizard who can set people on fire. Like, yeah, that's a good idea. My family don't
Yep.
listen to me, so now I've got this hot Travis Fimmel to hang out with.
But
I think
she
that's part of
she
what's going on.
she'll also know the princess. She'll know that he killed Kasha. So won't she kind of hate him for killing Kasha? Or maybe
Oh
she will
yeah.
know. I don't know if she'll know or not.
Hmm.
Maybe she
Hmm.
won't know. That's an interesting. I don't know. Maybe.
If she finds out they were killed the same way, I guess she can make the
She might put it
connection.
together, like if she's smart. But that's always the question in the Dune universe. Like, how much does everybody know? Because there's secrets. That's one thing when reading the. Even if you read the books, it's like, what does everybody at in all situations know at any point in time about everybody
Mm.
else? It's always I feel like a little vague. Like, how much does everybody know about the Bene Gesserit and how they operate? How much does everyone know about like spice? How much does everyone know about the Fremen and the Landsrat and the way things operate and work? I don't know. I don't know. It's always a
Yeah,
little vague.
that's one of the things I don't like about the show is that in the books you get the sense that the Bene Gesserit are incredibly secret, and you don't
Yeah.
know anything about their inner workings unless you're the goddamn Mother Superior. Uh, and like the universe at large, they don't know about Shai Hulud. Like I think we talked last week about how we don't like how
Oh, yeah.
Empress Natalia knows that not only that sandworms exist, but that they are called Shai Hulud,
That
which
bothered me.
Mm-hmm.
in the books it's
Yeah.
this incredibly like it's a secret that you kill for, like the secrets about, oh my god, the Fremen exist in the deep
Yes.
desert, the Fremen ride the sandworms, the Fremen know, like that is a huge secret, and all the mysticism is a huge secret. So the fact that 10,000 years ago everyone's like, oh yeah, Shai Hulud, yeah, whatever, like that's nah.
It's one of the biggest problems with not only this show but the Brian Herbert
Yeah,
timeline is that the
yeah,
Yeah.
Fremen shouldn't even really exist at this point in time if you look at just the Frank Herbert material. Like they shouldn't even
yeah,
be on Arrakis. So it's
yeah.
like they've pulled them back so far in the past that it really does not fit with what Frank Herbert did. And the show is just
Yeah.
trying to tie it together, but it's not really working that well. So I don't know.
I've got a premonition that we're gonna have like an Arrakis adventure episode in this show at some point, and I really hope it isn't just a repetition of what we see in the first Dune book and movie. Like we see thumpers in the trailers and stuff. Like it seems as though like the culture and the mechanics around sandworms and stuff are really similar now to how they were in the future, which
It's like exactly the same.
it,
You don't
it
have
it's a
better spice
disappointment because
harvesters.
because the whole point of the Fremen is that it took them millennia to develop their unique relationship with the sandworms, and it was only through millennia of
Hmm.
trial and struggle
Mm-hmm.
and learning. And it's like if it's just like, oh nope, this is just what everyone does. Everyone knows about it. This is how you do it. I mean, I was shocked even that like the spice harvesting industry looks so similar. Like in that recording that we saw of Desmond and the
Yeah.
Sandworm, like even the spice
Yeah.
harvesters, like it all looks like it's kind of the same system as what we see 10,000 years later in June, which is like, well, what's the point of being in a different era if it's so different? And
They've
again, as we
already
said,
got.
like Frank Herbert's time skips create so much change, so much
Mm-hmm.
difference. Whereas somehow this 10,000 year gap, no, everything's basically the same. It's
This is longer
disappointing
than
to me.
any Frank Herbert time skip. It's longer than
Yeah.
any time skip. And I've seen people say that, oh, it's because the universe was stagnating. But I'm like, 10,000 years, even at a stagnated rate, there should be more change.
Frank's
It's,
point is that stagnation leads to death. If the
yeah,
universe had been stagnant for 10,000 years, it would have collapsed. Like
yeah.
that's part of Frank's point.
It's just, it is a little annoying, especially like the Fremen. It looks like they look exactly the same. They've got their thumpers. I wonder if like we see them, are they gonna operate in the exact same way? That's a consistent culture for 10,000 years, and put it into scope too. We're talking about like different planets and different worlds. We're on Earth, and this is just one planet, and nothing stays the same for 10,000 years. So I can't imagine keeping a consistent, unchanging culture on like all of these different worlds for a solid 10,000 years, and it barely changes in aesthetic. So
And in
Yeah.
it is
fairness, like
weird.
the key piece of world building here is that they've just had a war and they decided to ban technology. So I guess you can make the argument that like, well, since they literally just have decided that we must never use advanced technology again, I guess that accounts for some of the stagnancy. But
Hmm.
it still leaves the question of, well, what's the point of revisiting a distant era that's just the same?
Yeah, and
Yeah.
with the Fremen, they were descended from the Zensuni wanderers who had this
Hmm.
huge, long migration
Migration.
across the universe before they have finally arrived on Arrakis. So, have they already done that after planet, which I think Seleucus Secundus is one of those two, on
Yeah.
their path to Arrakis? And then once they get to Arrakis, yeah, it's they have to learn how to survive, and they, you know, evolve into this strong society that will later take down the Sardaukar, and that would have it just it makes sense with how human adaptation, that it does require some time, but like these are extreme circumstances that they are finding themselves in, and not just the Fremen but everyone else that's having to advance themselves and still progress without that crutch of technology. And you just would consider that taking generations. I mean, just looking at our own history, and you could tell that would definitely and enhance the scale, like on a interstellar uh, uh, uh layout. And yeah, it would yeah, I would think that it would take even more amount of time for these peoples and factions to get to where we do eventually see them 10,000 years later. And I think that's something that general audiences continue to struggle with, and because it does feel a bit janky, um, that everything just looks so clean and everything is already so well established and organized, and the spice harvesting is well underway. And I just feel like that's the kind of one of the problems with the show. They're telling us what's happening instead of showing us, and we're not really getting the sense. I never really get the sense of how important spice is. I mean, we say that it's important, and they say if the, emperor doesn't get a handle on it, they're going to feed him to the worm. But I don't really see the dependence on
And
spice, the
yeah,
Imperium's
This
dependence.
leads to the question: were they snorting spice? Because it did have like a blue glow, but at the same time, she mentions orange spice, right? So I'm like, did you remember that scene, the sex position scene where they were like having sex and
in this episode
yeah, in this
or the
episode, right?
previous episode, because we
In
saw
this
we
one,
saw a different drug use in the previous episode, and then
well,
yeah, they
in
were like snorting some powder in this episode, and yeah, it's not at all clear what drug they were taking.
in the previous episode too, when they were like in the ship before they go to the club, they like they snort like some powder too, and I don't
Yeah,
know, it looked white that time, but here it looked like it might have been glowing slightly blue. I don't know, but I don't know what they were snorting.
yeah.
They're
I
just
guess it
doing.
could have been spice because
I don't
like the
think it's.
Fremen use it for spice orgies.
They were talking about spice at the same time that they were like snorting the drug. So I was like, are they
Yeah.
trying to imply that this is spice? But they also said spice was orange. And like, there's like some it's weird in the Dune saga. Like, is spice orange? Is it blue? No one knows. One of those
Yeah,
things.
there's a lot of really important things that they have not said. They have not said, "Hey, half the universe is addicted to spice, and if we stop producing it, billions of people will die." They have
True.
not said that or established that. Another thing they could say is all of our interstellar spaceflight and our entire economics depends on navigators taking spice. They have not
True.
said that. So are those things true at this time in this place? We
What
don't know.
what's the point of spice?
What is the point of spice? They just sort of take it for granted that like the first thing anyone learns if they've watched a Dune movie is, oh, the spice is really important. Everyone loves spice, and so they've sort of taken that for granted that everyone believes that. But it's we're meant to think a bit more deeply about these things. Why is it important? What does it mean to be dependent on such a substance? Like, I mean, those are the deeper questions, and they need to address those if they're going to
Yeah.
make us care.
I mean, all
Another thing,
commerce and civilization depend on it. It's not just a drug like for, recreational use. It
For when you
is
have
the
sex and you
entire
need to.
basis of their commerce and industry.
yeah, it's not like, oh, let's just put spice in here because it's Dune. Like, oh, let's put lightsabers in it because it's Star Wars. It's not just a symbol that makes something iconic. There's a point to it. Frank babbles on about hydraulic despotism and how anyone, like, he talked about it as being similar to oil and similar to water. Like, it's meant to be something with a deeper significance. But something else that we talked about last week, I think Elaine, we were talking about how like it's crazy that the Butlerian Jihad, this like galactic devastating war happened like just 100 years ago, and it doesn't look like it, does it? Like we should be
No.
seeing ruins
I
everywhere.
want to
The
see a ruined world.
galaxy
Yeah.
should be in ruins because
It's
like
too shiny and new.
I haven't read Brian Herbert's Butlerian Jihad novels, but I know that it involved like nuking hundreds of planets. Like
Yeah.
the devastation was on an unimaginable scale, and you don't get that sense at all in this show that we are just like slowly, painfully emerging from the ruins of a cataclysmic war. We should get that sense, but we don't. Like people
Yeah.
should be starving. People should be in desperate need of supplies and food. People should be rebuilding. People should be starting to farm again in radioactive wastes. I mean, this should be real grim, but no, they're just complaining about, oh, gotta extract the spice as usual. Gotta
Do,
arrange a royal wedding.
do you think that we're going to see more than like the three planets, like Seleucus, Secundus, Wallach 9, and Dune? Or do you think we might get a glimpse of another planet? Because I don't know. Like you said, where is the devastation? Like, I would love, like,
Yeah.
I don't know, like a shot of another planet that's like ruined and
Well, Seleucus
destroyed.
Secundus is ground zero, right? Like this is Zimia. Like this is the
True.
planet
Like,
that there were
where's.
giant stomping robots rampaging through the city just 100 years ago, and they're like, yeah, everything's fine. Like
It's
no,
beautiful.
it should be like
How did you
Dresden.
rebuild
Like
it?
they should be rebuilding the whole thing. It should not
True.
just be business as usual. Like we're standing in Chernobyl here, and they're just like, well, what's for lunch?
I just watched that show. I just watched that because it has the Valia in it, the Reverend Mother Superior,
Mm.
the HBO show.
I actually haven't
Anyway,
watched it yet. I've heard it's great.
it's pretty good. Yeah,
Mm.
she's like a made up character that's not historical. She's like a combination of a lot of historical scientist people, so she plays that role. But anyway,
Oh, speaking of Valia's actor Emily Watson, I like skimmed through her Wikipedia page. So Emily, who plays Valia, it says on her Wikipedia that Watson was a member of the School of Economic Science. At age 29, she was expelled from the school, and she described the organization as a very repressive regime and a system where you were supposed to think a certain way and you weren't allowed to think any other way. And breaking out of it was a very powerful release in her life. Doesn't
Wow.
that sound so much like breaking
Wow.
out of the Sisterhood of the Bene
It
Gesserit?
does. It does. That's incredible. That's actually really funny.
Yeah. I
Yeah,
wonder
I
if she's
didn't know all
drawing
that.
from
That's
that.
cool.
Yeah.
Interesting. Interesting.
Is that why
Interesting.
she was cast? She has an extra
Yeah.
background.
Maybe the casting director skimmed her Wikipedia as well.
I
I
I
feel like
do
the
like
casting.
the older Valia. She's really good in this.
Oh, here was a question that I had. With Theodosia and Ynez, is Theodosia going to be allowed to stay inside of the palace with the princess, or are all the Bene Gesserit being kicked out? Is it like get out, or will the princess Ynez be like, no, I want her to stay? What is going to happen with Theodosia? Is she returning
Oh
to Wall of
yeah.
Nine? Like because I don't know, because the Reverend Mother Valia sent her there to basically keep an eye on Ynez and make sure she doesn't stray from the path, essentially.
I did
Yeah,
think that
maybe
part was
she's
a
the
little
inside
strange.
man.
Like,
Yeah,
we
like what's
brought
going
you
to
a
happen with
friend
that?
to replace your beloved.
I know, right? Here's just this person.
And is
Yeah.
Theodosia like the most charismatic person to befriend Ynez? Like, is she qualified for that?
I have no idea. They didn't really say in the first episode why. Well, they actually did say. They said, because in the first episode they were discussing who Ynez was going to room with. And they
Yeah.
said that they wanted Theodosia because she they could control Theodosia and they didn't want someone that would influence the princess to like act against them. It wasn't necessarily because of charisma or anything. I don't know.
Hmm.
Yeah,
I don't know
so
if there
so
were
the
better options or not.
so the line is that they said Theodosia because she has reason to be loyal to us. We took her
Yes.
in when she had nowhere else to turn. She excels in her studies. She is uniquely useful.
Oh,
So, huh? So she's loyal and she's competent for unclear reasons, and therefore she's qualified to befriend the princess to use her.
it's like why? Like here's
Yeah.
hoping that they show us what is special about Theodosia. Maybe she's
And in this
particularly good
episode,
at something.
Valia told Theodosia they're going to Salusa, and Theodosia said, "But what about my circumstances?" So like,
What is that about? Yeah.
so it's like, does Theodosia have a personal connection to people at Salusa? Like, I wonder if Theodosia is related to someone at Salusa. Is she secretly someone's child, or did something happen to Theodosia on Salusa? Like, there's some secret here that they're yet to reveal.
There's a lot
Which
of little things going on in this show. They're really doing the Game of Thrones with all
Theodosia
these
has her
characters.
secret, Jen has her secret, Lila has her secret, um, Desmond has
Really?
his secret.
Is everybody following this? I'm just like,
Valia and Chula
Yeah.
have secrets, plural.
Do
Kieran,
do
of
you?
course, has his secret.
Oh no. Yeah.
I'm just thinking about my in-laws watching this. Like, they're gonna need me to explain everything to them. Like, do you know what's happening? I need to ask some people that I know in my real life. Like, are you following what's going on? Do you get everything that's happening? Are you confused? Because there's a lot of moving parts, and I don't know. It
Yeah.
remains to be
I,
seen how everything is gonna work together.
I think it's falling into the, I guess, a trap or a lot of a trope that these huge ensemble shows tend to go, which is that there's so much going on, and we keep cutting away to all these different characters and subplots, and we're probably more interested in the main plot and maybe like several main characters, but we're also like cutting away to these less interesting supporting characters and side characters that just feel like we're wasting time almost. And I don't know, I think I'm getting burned on these ensemble shows because I just think it's too much. And yeah, I'm watching Arcane right now too. I'm having a similar issue that there's so many characters, and I haven't finished it, so I haven't finished part 3. But they're just focusing on 3 or 4 characters and largely ignored like this huge swath of other characters that I'm really interested in and want to see their stories too. So it's that challenge of balancing out all of these storylines that they have going on, and I think it just waters it down at the end of the day.
My thing
Kind of slows
is,
it down, yeah.
though I do think that Kieran Atreides is useless, I think that Ynez's brother is more useless. Why does this character exist? And even in the first episode, they're kind of like a man without purpose, and I'm like, yeah, why does this character exist?
I'm
Like, are
glad
they
it's not
gonna
just me.
explain? Are they gonna
Yeah,
explain why he's here?
yeah.
He's to look pretty.
Constantine and Kieran
He's
are both
He is
just
hot.
himbos who stand around Ynez. It's like it would be such an easy cut to remove one of them. I'm sure they must be doing something with Constantine because as yet
Yeah.
there's nothing. I mean, I guess the point is that Constantine feels like he's failing his father, the Emperor, and he might do something to try and prove himself. And maybe it'll be something dumb. Like maybe he'll lash out and he'll try to do something brave and drastic, but it'll backfire. Maybe that's what's going on.
Yeah.
Also, I'm a little bit confused about the Constantine Ynez situation. Who's older and who's everybody's parent? So
I think
Javaco is
Ynez
his
is
dad.
older.
Is Ynez? So the Emperor got with
Isn't she
Ynez's
groomed?
mom.
Yeah, it sounds like she's
And
being
then-
groomed to be the heir or something, but I don't know.
Is
I'm a little
Constantine a bastard?
confused. Yeah,
Maybe Ynez is the true-born daughter, whereas Constantine is the bastard of a concubine, which is something that happens
that makes
a lot in the
sense.
books.
That makes sense.
Yeah,
Yeah,
he just
he-
seems useless. Like they're trying to find something for him to do to justify his existence in the show. And
Yeah, Constantine is described as a quote idiot bastard. He is a bastard. So I suppose the fact that Ynez is true-born is perhaps
Yeah.
why she is the heir to the throne.
Yeah, yeah. Well, I got that, but I was just wondering, like, when did he happen? Like, did he happen during the Emperor's marriage to the Empress, or before, or like, what's the deal? I don't know.
Oh yeah, it's
Oh,
like a
I-
Jon Snow thing. Like, is Natalia angry that the Emperor had a bastard with a concubine, or is that just common practice that's accepted?
Yeah, I'm not exactly sure.
I think there's going to be one of the
Film
other
comment says
characters.
Ynez is younger.
Oh, okay. Yeah, it's hard to tell. But yeah, okay. Yeah, I just and Kieran, I don't know. Hopefully this improves. I'm just not really invested in a story, and you can tell that the writers thought that it would have been on paper an epic moment to reveal that he's involved in this rebellion, but it really just felt flat to me. I was like, okay, that happened.
Yeah, the Kirin rebellion thing really fell flat. He was like walking around scanning the castle. It was immediately obvious what was happening. I was like, oh, he's a traitor. And I almost like didn't even need the next scene where he's like at the club again. They went back to the club with the ins music playing. It was less worse than the last one.
Yeah.
But like it's really the music that ruins it for me. Like that music, it's too modern. It sounds like too
Yeah.
much something that would be playing down the street.
I feel like I'm
Yeah.
watching another show, like Riverdale with the Dune skin.
Give me some like weird ass like Samuta hypnobong music, you know? Like give me something that feels like it's 10,000 years in a science fiction universe type thing. The other thing is like what is like the socio, this is going to sound silly, but what are the socioeconomic circumstances for people in Zimia these days?
so
Because that's
curious.
something that Frank Herbert was really interested in. Like in the books, you have like Margot and Hasimir walking down the streets of the Harkonnen world, which is
Giedi
Giedi Prime. And like unlike the movies where Giedi Prime is like space Mordor, in the books they walk down Giedi Prime and it's like, yeah, there's like a pretty normal city. There's like some like banners and like the Harkonnens have tidied it up in the way that real cities do clean up their cities before foreign dignitaries arrive for important meetings.
North Korea.
And they're walking down the streets and it's like, yeah, it's been made to look nice, but really I can see that the city's actually a bit grimy and the people are actually afraid, and I can see that the guards, like their weaponry is well worn, so they've been using it. Like this is a socially uncomfortable, discontent place, and later on there's all this weird stuff about, you know, by the way, oh yeah, the Harkonnens have like thousands of slaves that they keep in a giant cube. They have an immense black cube that dominates their skyscape. They're just chock full of slaves, and it's like, oh my god. And so like Frank was really interested in like what is the mood of the people, what are their economic circumstances, and what does that reflect about the political leadership, and what does that mean for the long-term future of humanity. All those big questions are relevant in this TV show. It's like, nah, it's just a bunch of like stylish zoomers in a club doing like unspecific drugs. Just a lot of really hip people. Yeah, they've got some like sheer outfits, and you can see their nipples. That's how we party in the year 10,000.
Yeah.
The year 100 BG. Which is like, okay, fine,
Mm.
but like, it's not what Frank would have written. Like Frank was interested in deeper questions about what's going on here, and what does it mean, and what can we perceive, and none of
Yeah.
that is going on in
Yeah.
this show.
And I
We're gonna
remember
keep
saying,
going for about 10 more minutes, guys, by the way.
yeah,
What were you gonna say?
I remember saying last week that how you can um, world build and expand your world like through conversation. But this is not what I meant when it happens in this episode, where it feels kind of unnatural and inorganic. Some of the things that characters say to each other, and that specific scene with the nightclub, that their characters are saying things that I feel like
Felt
the
like a video game.
characters already know, or like this is information they already know, and they're just saying it for the sake of the audience, I guess, as a little lore dump. And I think the next scene too, where the spice smuggler slash Bene Gesserit is conversing with the Reverend Mother Valia, she's like doing a mission statement of her mission, and like what the Bene Gesserit ideals. It's like you're speaking to the Reverend Mother Superior. I think she already knows this. But they're
That
Yeah.
just
is
little
such a
things
good
like
point.
that where like this is not. So when the Reverend Mother Mohayim is talking to Paul doesn't know anything about like what's going on behind the scenes, and so it makes sense for their conversation in the first book of Dune, for he's asking questions and Mohayim is answering, and she's filling out the world, she's building it out that way, so it feels natural that way. This came off to me at times as very inorganic. Like I don't think these characters would say this like that. I don't know,
I
but
agree. I think the absolute worst example of that in this episode was when Ynez was telling Kieran, "Oh, I was kidnapped by rebels, and it was traumatic
Worst
for me."
scene.
And Kieran says, "Quote, I've never heard this before." And it's like, dude, say it with your face. Act. Like just you should be able to see on Kieran's face that, oh, he's having an emotional reaction because he has not heard Ynez's story about the rebels before. But no, Kieran looks into the camera and said, it's like talks to the audience. I have not heard this information is new to me, says Kieran. And it's like it just struck me as such a unnecessary line, as
I
though
don't
treating
wanna
the audience like we're idiots.
I don't wanna hate on the actor too much, but oh my god, that dude is a wooden stick. Like,
And
oh my god. It's so not necessary that he even exists.
yeah.
But
And we've got to talk about this exposition. I mean, we
yeah.
talked last episode about how we thought it was a bit cringe, some of the like sexposition conversations during sex. It was so much worse in this
It was
episode. Like
awful.
in this episode, Constantine and Shannon Richese were literally mid coitus talking about, quote, space and time, and Shannon's dead brother Pruitt,
Who just died
while
horribly.
like during intercourse, talking about her dead brother. And like, yeah, the things they were saying about like, oh, your reputation it precedes you in time and space, and it's like it just was so unnatural and just so not what actual human beings would say or do.
Yeah.
It- I
It
mean, the
was
basic concept of the scene was fine. Like Shannon is like having fun, but also extracting information. Like that's fine. But like the dialogue was just oof.
I think the most insane part about that scene for me, like, and they try to explain it away, like, oh, we grew up on different worlds and yada yada yada. You were just in the room with like your little brother's like burnt corpse. You don't even know who did it. And
Yeah.
like this is what you're doing right now? You feel like you could potentially be in danger? Like shouldn't you, wouldn't you want to be close to your family and not like doing this right now? It's just so
Yeah.
bizarre. It's such a weird scene. I'm like, who would do this?
It really
I don't
felt like manufactured, and like a producer note, like maybe like, oh, we're going to be on HBO, so we got to fill that quota for.
I know HBO and their sex scenes,
I,
man. It's like we gotta put it in. We gotta do it.
Yeah, I really didn't like it's wholly unnecessary and it added nothing.
It
So, like
doesn't
the
fit.
crux of the scene, I mean, the whole point of it, I guess, what it mattered to the story was so that the Duke Richese could find out that there's someone in custody that is a suspect in his son's murder. He could have found that out any number of ways. We could have just started that scene where he's confronting the emperor, and he could have just said, "I've heard whispers that you have someone in custody," and I would have believed it. That would have made sense to me.
It's
So it's
so
wholly
true.
unnecessary. Yeah.
He's like, my
One of
daughter seduced your bastard son, and that's how I found out. Like, it's so weird.
one of the themes of the books is that Frank warns against indulgence. Like the Baron Vladimir Harkonnen overindulges in food
Hmm.
and in sex, and that distracts his mind and it makes him less effective. And there's also that sort of fall of Rome stuff where he's writing about the Imperium in general is overly decadent and indulgent, and that leads to its downfall. And I do get a bit of that sense from Shannon Richese because, like, Shannon is, this impeccably dressed, beautiful woman, and like, Constantine as well is just listless and he just seems to live for his own amusement and his own pleasure. And so I think that kind of fits with the theme of like Constantine and Shannon so coldly ignoring the murder of Pruitt and just engaging in sex and drugs for their own indulgence. I think that kind of fits that sort of, hey, look, this political system, this unequal political system is really crappy because you have like Horace and the rebels saying that, hey, like it's really unfair that the resources are being distributed unequally while these princesses and these spoiled aristocrats are having drug orgies every other Wednesday. So I think that does serve a purpose. Although I think that the execution of the scene was painful to watch.
I can agree with you there. Someone said, I just think the sex scene didn't need to go on for 3 to 5 business days. And I agree. It went on for a long time. I was like, okay, wrap it up. It's like, no, we got to zoom out again and do this angle and do that. Okay, we get it.
Yeah,
Anyway,
and I go on.
go ahead. No, no, go.
Well, I think I made a comment last week saying that Frank Herbert doesn't write about sex, and someone in the comments corrected me and disagreed with me because Frank does write a lot about sex. Like especially the later books are very horny books. Like the
For
bad
sure.
guys are literally dominatrixes from space. But I think my point is that Frank Herbert never wrote a normal sex scene. Frank Herbert never wrote, and he never gave like a blow by blow of like here's two people who love each other giving each other pleasure.
Blow by
No, it's
blow.
like it's about this. It's about the sandy juice of his fears, and it's about sexual conditioning, and it's about the 77 forms of. It's quote I can control genital temperature. Like it's
And
always about like the
pulsations,
weird,
don't forget.
like it's about like psychological manipulation, and like it's about like Frank believed that war was an expression of like collective sexual desire. Like he was really interested in sex as a psychological and even political force. He was not interested, and then the sexy people did the sexy sex, and then they
Yeah.
X Y Z. Like it,
Which is
Frank was
clearly the point
interested.
of that scene in the show.
Yeah, he never had sex just to titillate. He had sex in order to explore the depths of the human psyche. Were there any like depths of the human psyche being explored between Constantine and Shannon? No, I don't think there was.
Well, there were some depths being explored, but
There certainly were. Oh boy. Oh
Yeah.
boy.
anyway, I think. Oh no, what did you want to say, nerd cookies?
Well, I think just to close out my overall thoughts, I feel like I have the same praises and criticisms as I did in the previous episode. There's some really cool concepts and from Frank Herbert's mythos directly that I really enjoyed and that really just sparks your imagination. So, as a Dune fan, it was really cool to see, other memory and the threat of possession. That was the big takeaway for me, and it was so cool to
Yeah.
chat with you, gentlemen, about it. And but yeah, the same criticisms though. I think that there's just some scenes that feel like just completely different quality of writing. I feel like I'm watching a different show. So it really throws off the balance and the tone for me. And I feel like the potential could be there that just a few tweaks and this could really be a cool show, and hopefully it will lead to more things. But the potential is there if they can lean more into the what works the best in this show that really sparks the imagination with Frank Herbert's mythos. But yeah, that's my. It was
Mr.
great
Shift.
chatting with you guys and in the chat as
Yeah.
well. Nice to see your thoughts too.
What's your takeaway, Mr. Shift? Do you have any final thoughts on this episode? show in
Yeah,
general.
I feel similarly. I thought Lila's agony was really fun and provocative and surprising. I thought most of the rest of the episode was a bit underwhelming. Like I my feeling watching this show is mostly I just keep getting reminded how much I love Frank Herbert's books. So
Hmm.
we are, we're definitely working on some videos about Frank Herbert's books to explore them. It does not give me I don't have a huge amount of faith in this show, but we'll see how it goes. But I'm definitely really enjoying chatting about it with both of you, and I hope we keep doing this. It's fun.
It's been so much fun. And I will say that at the very least, I'm happy that they didn't drag out the who killed Pruitt, who killed Kasha thing, because I was worried that that was going to be like multiple episodes of them not knowing and trying to figure it out. But I'm glad they moved on past that at least. And I'm glad we've gotten to the point where we see that Desmond resists the voice. So I think there was good things to like about this episode, but it's getting messier by the episode. Right, as they're introducing more characters and more like little side things, it's getting messier, and I don't know if it can handle another degree of complexity. So I hope we'll see how they work in like what's actually going on with Desmond, and yeah, and I need to do some research to see like how the normies are following this show. But so far, I think a lot still remains to be seen, even though I'm generally enjoying it, and I'm really enjoying, like you said, doing these live streams afterward. It's been a lot of fun. But anyway,
Yeah,
guys, we're going to get going now. I hope you guys have a good night. Peace out. Love. And we'll see you guys later. Thanks for joining us. Hit the like button if you're still here. Bye,
like
guys.
and subscribe. Thanks for having us, Quinn. Thanks
Yes,
everybody. See
thanks.
ya.
See you next time.